I just wanted to go over some ideas of how to analyze, some reminders of how to analyze a text. So we're going to look at this poem um, called At the Gym by Mark Doughty. So one of the great things about analysis is sometimes you just have to read through it once. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the poem, and then we'll actually start breaking down like annotations and ideas of where we see symbolism and all of that. So At the Gym by Mark Doughty. This salt-stained spot marks the place where men lay down their heads back to the bench, and hoist nothing that need be lifted, but some burden they've chosen, this time more reps. More weight, the upward shove of it leaving collectively the sign of where we've been, shroud, stain, negative, flash onto the vinyl where we push something unyielding skyward, gaining some power, at least over flesh, which goads with desire and terrifies with frailty. Who could say who's added his heat to the nimbus of our intent, here where we make ourselves something difficult, lifted, pressed, or curled, power over beauty, power over power, though there's something more, tender beneath our vanity, our will to become objects of desire, we sweat the mark of our presence onto the cloth. Here is some halo, the living made together. So one of the first things we would do, just like we've done in class, would be to highlight some words that maybe we aren't incredibly sure what they're talking about. So you might say, oh, I don't know what goads means, and you might highlight that to come back to it. Or to the nimbus of our intent. Maybe we don't know what that phrase means. So some of those things that maybe just kind of come to us as like, I don't know what that means. And then we can kind of start going through. So especially when you're looking at poetry, you want to look at the oh my gosh, words are hard on this Monday morning. You want to look at the stanzas and how they're broken up. That might help you figure out what the author's trying to say, because often they're broken up so that you're paying more attention to certain ideas, or that certain ideas are grouped together. This one is not a poem where one stanza is really one idea and the next stanza is the next. They kind of blend together. In fact, they are all sort of one larger sentence in some ways, like there's no break. So we may not be able to say like, okay, this is about this and this is about this, but it might tell us what they want us to pay attention to. So we also want to check out the imagery. So I'm going to look at, let's choose a different color here. Let's do pink. This salt-stained spot, I think that's an interesting thing. It's definitely something that is a really clear image, and if you've ever worked out at the gym and you can kind of imagine the vinyl of the place where on the bench press where people have put their head over and over and over and over again. So I'm just going to go through, I'm going to find the part that kind of sticks out to me in each of these stanzas. And the thing that stood out to me in this one was it's also the longest line, which is interesting. But some burden they've chosen. So this idea of choice and burden I thought was interesting, because normally a burden is something that you carry that isn't really a choice. It's something that's been put on you, but here we have a burden that's been chosen. So that stood out to me. More weight, the upward shove of its leaving collectively. This was probably the part that I found the most interesting of this one. Collectively, the sign of where we've been. Just because I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. So, is this about doing something together? This idea of collective, and how does that go with what we were thinking before? Probably gaining some power. Power comes up multiple times, and I know that because I've read it already, right? So now I see this is kind of the first place they talk about power. Um, and then, Control Z. Here's something that interests me, the terrifies. This is something that was like new and kind of new to this piece. We make ourselves something difficult. Kind of comes back to the idea of maybe that burden they've chosen. Um, Power over beauty, power over power, though there's something more. And I think that kind of leads me to think that this is where the author is about to tell me what they're thinking. Our wills become objects of desire. Here in some halo, the living made together. And so the living made together, that makes me think back to this collective idea. So I'm seeing some connections. So if I had, let's see if I can insert. This is so different than the version I have on my work computer. So I'm seeing some connections here. I'm seeing some connections come on, line between here and here. I saw some connections between here and kind of this idea. And then that halo that is mentioned down here, that I saw a connection between that and this salt stained spot. So as we're looking through, we've got a lot of our pieces that we've kind of highlighted and thought about are connecting to somewhere else in the poem, which probably tells us that we've picked some pretty decent images because they have come up multiple times. So now we have to start thinking about what is this representing and what could be the symbolism behind it. So one of the things we might think about is this salt stained spot. So what could the salt stained spot represent? And so we have this idea of a halo, and then when we think of a halo, what do we think of? We usually think of something that has religious significance and generally good, right? Like angels and halos. So we have that idea there. So the author, but then we also have salt stained, which sounds kind of gross to me, but salt stained, why? Because of sweat, because of hard work, because it's repetitive, right? It's happening over and over again. So could we say something that's connecting this, like the idea of good, because I don't think this is a religious poem, but the idea of good with repetitive and hard work and sweat? Probably. Perhaps. So we'll leave that. We'll come back to it. Let's make it a little bit bigger though so we can see it. And then let's go to this idea of the burden that we have chosen. So that to me sounds like, so we have this idea of burden. Generally burdens are hard ideas or things to carry, right? You've like heard, that's my burden to bear. It's the thing that I have to deal with. And then we have this idea of choice. This is all a choice. And that might connect in some ways to this idea of hard work and repetition. So that this is something people have to make the decision to do. And then, but I still think it's weird. It almost feels like, does the author or the speaker of this poem, does the author believe that this is good? And I think probably by the end when we see this idea of the halo, I think they do, but in this stanza, they hoist nothing that need be lifted. it does make it sound kind of pointless. So there is, to me, there's kind of this shift in the poem of like, oh, why do people do this? It's pointless to making it so that it's not as pointless. And then we have this idea of the collective and doing things together. So what might we say there of our ideas? Let's just start in 14 this time. So we could say something about humanity, the collective. I mean, I guess who is the collective? Is it gym goers? Is it humanity as a whole? Is it people who are vain? Right, we have this idea of power over beauty, at least over flesh, which goes with desire. People who are vain, and I sort of want to push the idea of maybe they're talking about humanity in a way, because we don't have, or at least men, right? Because men are the only people that are really called out. We're not really calling out women. We're not really calling out anyone else. But we do have this idea of men. So maybe that's who we're talking about. And then the author, we, is mentioned. So the speaker is at least including themselves in this. And our author is male. So that's something to think about. And then, so is this how men think or how men react? So we ask ourselves these questions as we're going through and analyzing, because it's going to help us figure out, okay, where are the larger questions? So if we had to right now pick a message, oh, don't go into the next page. I'll make you smaller. There we go. If we had to include a message here of what we think this is about, we might look and say that based on kind of all these things we've talked about, that men, that's the group we're talking about, use the gym as a way to what do I want to say here? I almost want to say that like the gym gives men the power to control their own it's like selves in a way, because it's power over beauty, power over power. We talk about vanity, and it's kind of that a negative thing, but I think it is an interesting poem to kind of just start breaking down. It's got some really great imagery that I'd want to spend more time with if I was really going to write about this. But it really, I think, has some familiarity that makes it great, of like the salt stained spot, the hoisting nothing that need be lifted, and this idea of gaining power. All of those things are kind of easy to see, but they can have that when we start connecting them, we start seeing larger ideas. So I'll do another poem like this in another video. Thanks guys for watching. See you later.